You're listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, the place to learn about new technology and technological advances before they become mainstream. This episode is sponsored by Ingram Micro Security. Strengthen your security practice. Let's get into it.
Welcome to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. I'm your host, Shelby Scarhawk, and our guest today are Gus Iannello, Technical Account Manager with Ingram Micro, and Jeremy Snow, System Engineer with Veritas. Gus and Jeremy, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So today we're talking about resilience against ransomware. But first, let's talk about the threats out there, Gus. What's important to understand about ransomware and how prevalent is this threat?
Sure. So for me, I think the most important thing to understand is that ransomware is everywhere. Ransomware attackers are targeting victims literally of all sizes, whether it's large-scale enterprises, SMB. They're even targeting vendors as well as, technology providers like MSPs. So it's very important to understand that the threat is very widespread and it's also constantly evolving, right? So it's attacking pretty much every infrastructure, and that even includes cloud, right? There's a lot of false security around the sense that, well, my data is living in the cloud, so I should be protected. And that's not the case. So for me, really, the most important thing is to keep in mind that, like I said, no matter where your business sits, you are a potential target.
So, Jeremy, what areas of a business are particularly most vulnerable to ransomware? There's lots of entry points that could be vulnerable, but I guess what are the areas that are most vulnerable, and how does Veritas help protect these areas?
No, it's a great question. And I mean, when you think about it with ransomware, the goal is really to, take control of someone's system, disrupt their business or their mode of operations. So, you look at examples like the pipeline back in May, which got compromised for a few days. The goal here is to obviously take control of someone's system and then be able to retrieve, funds for the system to give it back. So, from, a Veritas side, we work in the mode of protect, detect, and recover. So obviously we protect your data and your workloads, but at the same time we want to be able to detect any anomaly detection prior to any type of ransomware. So we'll be able to detect this through some of our softwares, which we'll be talking about today. And of course, recovering, whether you want to recover locally or maybe your site has got compromised, you want to recover at an alternate location or in the cloud. So we have a very sort of strong play against ransomware between our software and our hardware. Both together have a very strong play against ransomware.
That's a great point there. Protect, detect, and recover. Those are key tenets there. So, Gus, can you tell us about Veritas anomaly detection system?
Sure. So in the theme of detection, NetBackup 9.1, which is the latest version of Veritas NetBackup, has an added feature, as you just said, called anomaly detection. And it's an engine that is essentially programmed to detect any suspicious activity within NetBackup jobs. So what this engine does is it looks at job metadata, like image size, number of files, data transferred, etc. And what it's doing is it's trying to find out if there are any out of the ordinary processes happening. So if it does detect, an abnormal or suspicious change in these parameters, what it's going to do is it's going to create an alert within the NetBackup web UI so that administrators can take swift action against any anomalous activity. And like Jeremy was pointing out, being able to detect that anomalous activity and being quick to action is really a key tenet of being resilient against ransomware.
No, that's a great point, Gus. And, and I kind of want to just add into that as well about the anomaly detection that, that being part of our NetBackup 9.1 software, if you go look into it a bit deeper, there are other software solutions out there, but to have a full secured hardened play against ransomware, I always like to highlight as well with our hardware is that we have the IDS, the intrusion detection system, or some people know it as intrusion protection system, IPS. And this is something that's been around with Veritas and our hardware appliances for about 16 years, and we send this out to get sort of hacked. Some of these hackathons, we obviously offer cash rewards so they can get root access, which thankfully up to this point have been unsuccessful. So when we talk about immutable storage integrations, it's great to have your data backed up, but if your system gets compromised, this is another thing. And with intrusion protection system, this stops any type of outside the scope of any of the processes that happen within NetBackup. So this is hardened within the appliances. So, manipulation is, I like to think, pretty much almost impossible, but I never want to say impossible because there's always any possibility. But it's a very secured and hardened system, which helps with that play against ransomware.
Definitely. Well, that's impressive that that this has kind of been hack tested, and so it hasn't been penetrated before, or it hasn't in these hackathons.
Yeah, so basically how these things work is you get a certain cash reward at a certain level of access, but the ultimate would be root access. And, as far as I've seen up to this point, there has never been that, with these tests put in place. But on top of that, with our customers, I haven't seen any reports as far as anything like that. And that's because, again, it's embedded in the system itself, and it won't run any processes outside that scoped list. So this can go into more depth as far as the security hardening behind it. But yeah, this is kind of what we have. So, along with our software and anomaly detection, we do have that hardening as well within our hardware to offer a good sort of all-around software and hardware solution.
Well, Jeremy, let me ask you about data visibility. What is Veritas doing there?
Oh, that's a great question. So in Veritas, what we have is the API. So it's the availability, protection, and insights. So these are our three major pillars we play in. Protection being net backup, which we've been primarily talking about today, but our insight pillar, this is where it gets to, insights on your data. So we have two solutions, data insight. This will give you full sort of access and visibility to your data. So you're able to go in and see the type of level of risks that might be associated to it. Is it personal information? Do too many people have access to the information? And again, then there's also anomaly detection within data insight that allows you to see any type of malicious intent or unusual activity of users accessing specific information. And then knowing that data, if it's personal information, you might have some type of remediation play there where you might want to sort of investigate or put something in place to remove access. So it's a great way to sort of protect your data. Now, on the infrastructure side, we also have Aptar Analytics, and this is a great solution. So this solution allows you to sort of monitor your environment on an infrastructure optimization base. But then if we're talking about ransomware, we have a long list of ransomware reports that work within, let's say, our backup solutions. Now, the great part about Aptar is that, obviously it looks at Net Backup and Backup Exec, our two backup solutions, but you don't have to be a Veritas customer to run Aptar. This will actually integrate with a wide variety of different technologies, including all of our competitors as well. So we don't discriminate. This solution is great for, that enterprise level structure, giving you a lot deeper analysis to sort of add into what, you might see in Net Backup 9.1 with the anomaly detection, but this will go much further and much more granular as well. And of course, it'll integrate with other backup solutions in case you don't have, let's say, Net Backup or Backup Exec.
Well, so Jeremy, staying with you, in speaking about data, let's talk about dark data or data, whichever you prefer. What is that? And I guess how is it connected to data silos?
Yeah, so, I think a lot of people might have seen this where you have, let's say, the Databerg, and it's, it shows a certain percentage of dark data, then it shows, rot, which is redundant, obsolete, or trivial, and then there's only a small percentage of data that actually, we really need, or that's active, let's say, and that's being used. So the percentage is we've seen it, I've seen it with customers where it's very large. It could be, more than 50% of your data. Working in a previous field, I've actually experienced that, is that we don't really know what's in that data. So that dark data could be what we call stale, which is just data that hasn't been accessed over a certain period of time, let's say years. Then there's orphan data. So it's data that has no owner anymore. Let's say an application shuts down or a user leaves the company. This data is still just sitting there. So with that dark data in place, this basically could be personal information. It could just be a waste sitting on tier 1 storage. So there's a cost, there's a risk associated to it.
And I want to highlight the term that you use. So a databerg, we're talking about like an iceberg. So, what's above the surface is what you see, what you use. But down below, that could be, they say 10% of the iceberg is above water. The rest of it's down below. That could be a significant amount of data that's kind of being wasted there and vulnerable, right?
Absolutely. And so that's exactly what we see. And, if the customer doesn't act on this, it could lead to a number of issues. It could just be associated to just a lot of waste, let's say. So tier one storage sitting there, high cost on fees on hardware and also software. So both Data Insight and also Aptar Analytics will actually run reports based on this information, and it'll identify right away what's stale, what's orphaned. And at the same time, it'll identify personal information. So, identifying, saying this is personal information and it has open access pretty much to anyone. So you either need to secure that data, it's sensitive information, or delete it or archive it, let's say, to an alternate location. So I think that's probably one of the most important things, especially with ransomware out there, is that it's never a matter of if it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. They're out there, they're looking at vulnerabilities. So it's good to get that plan put in place, because unfortunately we do see customers that come to us after the fact saying, we didn't have a ransomware plan in place. And then unfortunately it's messy after that, that's for sure.
Definitely. Well, Gus, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, just to add to that, we talked a lot about the threat of ransomware with that dark data, but we have also entered the age of data regulation and, data laws that are going to compel organizations to better handle that data, regardless of their current practice. So, even if they're not currently under some sort of regulatory demand to better maintain that data, that's coming, and they will be forced to. So getting a practice in place now that takes a better look at that data is very important.
That's a great point. That's something that if you're solely a United States company, maybe it doesn't affect you directly, but most companies are multinational. So what is affecting the EU will end up affecting American companies as well, right?
Yep, exactly. And we're even seeing it here in the U.S. California has a pretty large data regulatory practice.
Right, yeah.
And, the right to be forgotten or right to deletion that is being afforded to customers is something that is trying to be kind of pushed through in other governing bodies across the country. So I definitely think we're going to see more of it.
Yeah. Well, going back to this kind of orphaned data, let's talk about unprotected workloads and unprotected servers. How do you identify those, Gus?
Sure. So for me, the greatest tool I think to do so, and it's one that Jeremy talked about a bit, is Veritas Aptar IT Analytics. As Jeremy said, it has the ability to report on many different types of backup solutions to not only optimize, but its backup manager functionality actually facilitates the discovery of unprotected data, meaning it can automatically identify clients or data sets that are not currently assigned a backup policy. So that means they're not being protected. And this happens a lot, especially when you have large virtual deployments where a lot of machines are being brought up online at once, and sometimes some get lost in the fold. So those workloads need to be protected and identified quickly, and an Aptar can do that. And not only can it identify those unprotected workloads, but it could also help eliminate things like false positives. So it can actually detect when a backup software has incorrectly reported a successful backup job, whether it was completed partially or it actually failed, and it will report against that. So, not only is Veritas helping monitor competitor solutions, but they're actually making them better by enhancing their reporting capabilities and making sure that data is actually being protected and is recoverable.
Definitely. Well, as we start to wrap up this episode, we ask everyone the same question because they have really their pulse on technology, whether it's in their niche or technology at large. So, where do you see technology going in the next year? Gus, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. So, I think we'll see this start in the next year, but it will definitely expand out as we go through the decade at least. But from a technology perspective, I think we're going to see things move in a more distributed or decentralized direction, especially in terms of like 5G, edge computing, IoT, et cetera. As data processing moves out to the edge and you to get the deployment of those edge devices, the idea of centralizing computing is kind of going to go by the wayside because, folks need to have that data processed quickly, in those locations where it lives. So right now we see a pretty big push to centralize computing because of things like cloud solutions and the continued emphasis on the data center. But as like I said, as 5G and IoT begin to be adopted more on a larger scale, I think we're going to see things move in a more distributed or decentralized fashion.
And Jeremy, how about you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree with Gus. And, just to echo some of that, at least what I'm seeing trending as well is that, obviously due to COVID, this kind of was sort of an eye opener, I guess you could say. And a lot of customers not being able to access their data centers had a lot of hard times, having those restrictions and not being able to be on site. So I think you're going to see a lot more workloads being moved to the cloud. And then you're going to almost see, a lot of big companies actually adopting multiple cloud vendors for that level of redundancy and depending on that cost model and also the services that they offer. So, and that's one of the great things as well is that with Veritas, a lot of our solutions are in their marketplace, so easier to deploy in the cloud. So, and we've been seeing this trend as well. So we're seeing at least some workload mobilities where certain workloads are going to the cloud and people are starting to analyze at least what they want to keep and what they want to get rid of. So, I think you're going to see more hybrid models, at least hybrid cloud models being adopted in the next few years, just in case, not having that access to their data sites and just having that sort of one less thing that they need to monitor and maintain is a data center as well. So, yeah.
Well, excellent insights and great stuff to think about. So if our listeners have more questions, how can they reach out?
Sure. So they can contact me at augustin.ianello@ingrammicro.com. I'm also on LinkedIn under Gus Ianello. So yeah, feel free to reach out with any questions. Be happy to facilitate more information or get them connected to the right resources so that they can expand on their knowledge of Veritas as well as ransomware.
If anyone ever feels to reach out as well, I mean, obviously Gus and I are very well connected and we talk on a weekly basis. But again, I'm also on LinkedIn as well at, Jeremy Snow. So feel free to reach out to me there or my email at jeremy.snow@veritas.com. And I'm always happy to take a call or email. Yeah.
Excellent insights. And I think our listeners will appreciate that level of insight and the ability to reach out with their questions. So, Jeremy and Gus, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us. It was great.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in and subscribing to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. If you like this episode or have a question, please join the discussion on Twitter with the hashtag B2B Tech Talk. Until next time, I'm Shelby Skurhawk.
You've been listening to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro. This episode was sponsored by Ingram Micro Security. B2B Tech Talk is a joint production by Sweetfish Media and Ingram Micro. Ingram Micro production handled by Laura Burton and Christine Fan. To not miss an episode, subscribe today in your favorite podcast platform.